Hello everyone, welcome to RCD ShareNet. I'm Ella Huang. I'm here to talk to you about Registered Disability Savings Plan. So the acronym used for this term is RDSP, so I will be using that so that it's not so much a mouthful. The RDSP sometimes is also referred to as the Canada Disability Saving Program. So sometimes when the federal government refer to this, they will use the Canada Disability Saving Program. So we are talking about the same thing. So when I just use the term RDSP to just include everything that is within this program. RDSP is quite a complex system. And that is, of course, that is developed by the federal government, and there is some purpose for that. So just very generally, what is RDSP? So RDSP is a long-term saving plan to help Canadians with disabilities to save for the future. So keep this in mind, to save for the future. That means the money you obtain from various sources, including the government, is not for your immediate use, but probably down the road when you turn 60, and that is the time to take out the money to use. So that is what it means by saving for future. And this is also first of its kind in the whole world. So this is a remarkable cooperation of the federal and provincial government. So we would be talking more about this, how the two levels of government work together to make this happen. And this is a tax deferral vehicle, and also it is a nationwide matched savings plan. Okay, so that the more details will be given on this as well. So I want to give you some facts about RDSP before we move forward to talk about the basics of RDSP. So some facts are in the year 2007, the federal government, they kind of proposed a budget for RDSP, and then it's been accepted, and then it's implemented in the year 2008. So for 2017, why am I referring to that? Because, in 2017, that is the latest report from the federal government having done a review on RDSP. So most of the statistical data is actually obtained from this review. So I'll be referring to that. So in 2017, approximately 7,841 new RDSP were registered. So that is quite a significant number of RDSP being registered. So based on the Government of Canada, from this particular report in 2017, and because it's launched in 2008, so with the cumulative figure about that is altogether 168,567 plans were registered. And the Government of Canada paid $1.8 billion in grants and $837.5 million in bonds. And total personal contribution amounted to $1.24 million. And total asset held in RDSPs exceeded $4.16 billion, and on average, each plan had about $25,000 in assets. So those are some background information to tell you what is the magnitude of RDSP. And if you are eligible to apply for it and you have not done so, this is the information that is useful for you to consider. And a little bit more about the stats. What is the highest uptick in number? In fact, it is in the order of Ontario, BC, Quebec, and Alberta. So that is pretty obvious because Ontario, the population is highest. So when they count the number of people of uptick, so that is the highest. And the lowest are territories, Prince Edward Island, and perhaps that the population is smaller in those. However, saying that is the percentage of uptake. So BC is not doing that badly. In the percentage of uptake for the age 0 to 49, for BC is 38.9%. Actually, is the highest of the percentage uptake rate. And Ontario, 32.5%, Alberta, 31.8%, and Saskatchewan, 31.1%. So you see that so this is actually referring to the people who are eligible to open an RDSP account, which they have done so. Is in BC is about 40%. So what is happening with the remaining 60%? Okay, now we have given you some facts about RDSP, and then you say, oh, there are a lot of kind of money involved in that, and there are not a very high uptake of the people who are eligible to open. But let us talk a little bit about that and why we would think that this is a good idea for people with disabilities who are eligible to open an RDSP account to do so. So let us talk about something you'll be very interested in, is money. So the money, like with that is, when we talk about RDSP, so it is a registered savings plan. So what savings plan you have heard about? I think most people are quite familiar with RRSP or RESP. And RRSP is the registered retirement savings plan, and the other one is the registered educational savings plan. So if you're familiar with that, so what is the difference, and then the similarity between these two savings plan and the RDSP? So the same thing is they are all registered savings plan. What does that mean? So they do have government protection and of course some restriction. And then if you want to know more about this, you probably want to talk to your financial advisor. What is the restriction of a savings plan? So I'm not an expert in that area, so I'm not going to talk about it, but that is worthwhile to find out. And normally, when the financial advisors know that it is a registered savings plan, they would follow the restriction of the government to do that. And also the same thing, it is very similar for the RESP in the way that for RDSP, the recipient, the beneficiary, will be able to have contribution from the government. And then in the RDSP is in the grants and bonds. And I know that RESP also, that for the future education of children, the government also giving some grants and for that to help with the savings. So this is very similar with the RDSP. And what is different? So for RDSP, this is very, one thing is pretty lenient, is anyone can contribute to an RDSP with written permission of the account holder. So this is important to know. And also the difference is the proceeds in an RDSP account are not considered as an income. Thus, they do not affect any disability benefits. And usually getting disability benefits is income sensitive. So those are the like and unlike of the three different types of RDSP. So now, coming to RDSP, we want to know is, earlier I mentioned that the holder, then you may wonder, what is the holder? So now we want to talk about is who can apply for an RDSP, and what is the eligibility criteria to open an RDSP account? So who are they for, mainly? So in order to apply for RDSP, there are certain restrictions or the guidelines, for people to do that. Number one, the person who opened the RDSP account, we also we'll talk a little bit more about that, is the beneficiary. So eventually the person will receive money from the RDSP. The person must be under the age of 60. And a Canadian resident with a social insurance number, so you need a social insurance number to open the account. And also, one very important criteria is the person is eligible for disability tax credit. Okay, so disability tax credit, that is not within the context of today's talk. So I'm not going to go very deep into disability tax credit. We maybe in future have some sessions on disability tax credit, but that is mainly a non-refundable tax credit for people living with a disability. So the important thing is in order to apply for the RDSP, the person must have a valid disability tax credit And then for that, so the validity is also important. Sometimes people are eligible for the DTC for a few years. If it is not continuously over the years, then when the DTC is no longer valid, then the RDSP may not be valid anymore. So that is a little bit of situation with that. We'll talk about it later on, perhaps in the third sessions of this series. Okay, so now the next one is, now we know that the eligibility criteria and how do you open an RDSP account. So we need to approach it with a little bit systematical planning. First of all, we need to identify the beneficiary, which is, I mentioned about the term earlier. So that is the person who will eventually receive the money from the RDSP. So this person is actually the person with the disability. Then the next step is to identify the account holder. So account holder is the person who can open the RDSP account and can contribute directly or authorize someone to contribute to the account. So this is, not everyone just can put money in. However, I mentioned actually with written permission from the account holder, other people can contribute as well. So it helps the growth of the RDSP account. And the other main role of the holder is to manage the RDSP investment. So RDSP investment is also quite complicated. If you're familiar with RRSP, you know that you have financial advisor to assist you with investing the money there. As I mentioned earlier, we are not talking about investment choices or option, not even recommendations. So, but that one is who will make the ultimate decision how to invest the money in the RDSP is indeed the holder. And then also, the holder is also responsible, working in tandem with a financial advisor mostly, is to fulfill the registered saving plans requirement. So what are the requirements? Other than being a registered saving plans, I think they have some specific requirement about how you can make your investment. That part I'm not too sure about, but then you can find out more information. But with the RDSP, there are some requirement you need to observe if you're the holder. Number one is, that is a lifetime contribution limit. So you cannot contribute more. If you contribute more, it's like a lot of other, the accounts or the savings plan, you may face some fine, some penalty with that. So the lifetime contribution limit for the RDSP is $200,000. And also, the contribution are only permitted to make the contribution is the last year that the contribution can be made is the year turning 59. So once the beneficiary reaches the age 60, there's no more contribution to be made. So if you do that, that means over contribution. You may face some penalty in that. So that is important to be aware of that. And then it's about withdrawing from the RDSP, So beneficiary normally is the person who can take money out from the RDSP. So that is important to know that, and that and also kind of that is the holder's responsibility to see who is authorized to withdraw money from the RDSP, and who can be a holder. So it sounds that it's quite complicated, even just to identify the holder. Then who can be the holder? So the situation is sometimes because it changes all the time. So we just from the most simple approach. If the beneficiary has attained the age of majority, that means the beneficiary is an adult. So when the person opens up the RDSP account and the person is an adult, then the beneficiary will be the holder. Okay, so that is very important to observe that. But that's the exception. So we know that the RDSP is for people with disabilities, and sometimes the person, the beneficiary, they are not able to they're not competent to enter into legal contracts. So that is what's written on the documents. So what it really means is maybe the intellectual capacity of the individual is not able to understand what's written in the contract. Now that is the one of the interpretation is the person is not competent to enter into the legal documents. Then in that case, the holder can be a representative who is legally authorized to act on behalf of the beneficiary. So it's not anyone who can do that, but the person must be legally authorized, because now we're talking about an adult representing another adult on the legal terms. So there are certain status that the person must have in order to assume this position. So that is the legally authorized, and we'll talk about who can be legally authorized to act on behalf of the beneficiary. It is a little bit, why I want to kind of draw attention to this is, a lot of times when to represent another adult, it's not just simple by saying, oh, I ask another person to represent me. When it comes to financial situation, legal situation, the process has to be formal. And because the legislation in different provinces are not exactly the same, so there is some confusion over this. Who can represent the beneficiary who's not competent enough to enter into a contract? In BC, we have the representation agreement, and sometimes that is valid. But in some other provinces, they may not have that. So as this is a federal government plan, so it has to be implemented across Canada. So it has to have the same standard. So in December 31st and 2013, they have put in a term called the qualifying family member. That can, this is a person, a family member, who can represent the beneficiary. So the qualifying family member is a spouse or common law partner or parent. So provided they are all living together, then they can, this qualifying family member can be the holder and open the plan for the beneficiary. However, this arrangement, the federal government has given approval, and this will be valid until December 31st, 2023. So after that, they may have other arrangement, or they continue to have the qualifying family member. We don't know about that, so we'll keep you posted on that. So now coming to the point that if the beneficiary is a child, so a child may be born with a disability. If that is the case, then a legal representative will be holder. So for a child, the legal representative is a little bit straightforward. So who can it either be a legal parent, a legal guardian, or a public department, agency, or institution. So if any of that entity can represent a child to open up an RDSP account. And it is important, if we know that the child is eligible to open the RDSP account, to do it as early as possible. And we'll talk about it in the upcoming sessions, why it is important to open an RDSP account as early as possible, because that is a good way of maximizing the RDSP. Okay, so this is, we mentioned earlier, so that is the legal representative for a child. So how about when the child grows up and then has reached the age of majority? So now the situation becomes a little bit complicated. Now earlier, if the person is an adult, then the first choice is to have the adult enter in to open the RDSP account and be in charge and be the holder. But if that is a child, so when there's still a child, then the legal representative will be the holder. And if the child turns 18, and what will happen? So if the child is able to enter into contracts, so they're competent, then they understand contracts, then the child will be the holder. So that is a change of the holder here. The other alternative is if the child is not competent enough to enter into a contract, or even the competency is in doubt, then they can have either the qualifying family member to do that, or have a legal representative to do that. So it can be a joint account, or it can just be the sole holder of the RDSP. So that is sometimes the changeover is a little bit complicated. If it is not understood fully, and then the child with who are not able to enter into contract becomes the holder, and then not able to assume all the responsibilities, so that might be something needs to look at, and that may not be able to maximize the RDSP. Okay, so now we have identified the beneficiary, the holder, and then we understand who can be the holder. Everything is in place. Then you go and open the RDSP account. So where can you go to do that? So it is very simple to mostly all the financial participating financial institutions, or simply we just call them banks or credit unions. Then most of them you can go there and open your RDSP account. So they're known as RDSP, and the grants and the bonds issuers. So they represent the government to issue the RDSP to the individual who are valid to open the RDSP account. So that is, something that you can ask, go to the bank and know, are you an RDSP issuer? And if they are, then they can do that. How RDSP helps with saving. Now, we are saving for the future. So what will happen when you open, after you have opened up, how can you grow it? So that is important to know. Because the government is actually assisting with helping with the RDSP to grow by providing two very important things. One is the Canada Disability Savings Grant, and from now on I would just call it the grant. And the other one is the Disability Savings Bond, and from now on I'll call it the bond. So if you, of course, this is a saving account, then if you have some money to put in the RDSP, you save some. And when you do that, when you put some money in, the government will give you some bonds. So they are called matching amounts. And the government is actually quite generous in these regards, and giving you about, depending on your family income and also the amount of your annual contribution, they can give you 100%, 200%, or 300% of what you have put in. That is pretty good. So I will give you some concrete example in a bit. And then for every year, in a year, that the maximum grant you can get from the government is $3,500. And that is also one more thing to take note of, is that is a lifetime limit. So they are not giving you forever. The maximum amount of grant you can get from the government is $70,000. If you do the maths, then it's actually 20 years. So that means if you're receiving the maximum grants every year for 20 years, there's no more coming. When you do the planning, that is important to take note. Although there is no annual contribution limit to the RDSP for individuals, so the beneficiary or the holder, and then when they put the money in, there is no limit every year. However, that is a lifetime limit. And that is important to take note of that. The lifetime limit is $200,000. Okay. So that is all the amount you can put in. Just one note, which I will talk more about in the second session, is if you decide to put in $200,000 at one go, 1 year, then the room for contribution has been used up. The next year you have no more room for contribution. Okay, so remember that. So is this something you want to do? Because without your contribution, that is no grant. So that is something that is important to take note of. And the other thing is also the contribution made to the RDSP. So that will trigger. I will explain how it's going to trigger a grant. So the contribution will lead to the grant coming, but that is only up to the age of the year the beneficiary turns 49. So this is also very important if someone who is already in the adulthood and not started very early. So that is a limited number of years that you can contribute and get the grant. So it is important to take note of as well. Then the second thing we want to talk about is how to grow your RDSP is to receive the bond from the government. So depending on the families, the beneficiary's family income, the RDSP account can receive the bond of up to $1,000 a year. Okay. The beauty of this bond is you actually don't need to make any contribution. If your net family income is within the income threshold, you will automatically receive the $1,000 bond into the RDSP, provided you file your income tax. So that is that. If you don't file your income tax, that is no way to determine the family income. The bond will not come. So that is important to do that. Again, that is a lifetime limit of receiving the bond. The total amount of bond that you can receive is $20,000. Again, if you receive $1,000 a year, that's 20 years. So exactly the same arrangement as the grant. And then normally the bond will be paid into the RDSP on December 31st of that year until the person turns 49. So turning 49, that is the last year the beneficiary will receive the bond. So that is very similar situation of the grant. Okay, so the last part of today's session I will talk about is how to calculate the grants and bonds in order to get the maximum out of it. So one thing I mentioned about is the family income. So the family income, that is, and then the limit, the threshold for the family income will change every year. It is indexed, so they will revise it every year. So the amount I'm going to give you is for the year 2020, the tax year. And because they need to base on the tax filing of the family to determine that. So for the tax year 2020, if the net family income is $97,069 or less, then for own contribution of the first $500, the government will give you 3 times. So for the first $500 you put in, the government grant will be $1,500. And then if you have more money to contribute, then after the $500 you contribute $1,000, it will give you $2 for each dollar donated. So that means for that the second $1,000, you'll get $2,000. So if you put in the $1,500 per year of your own contribution, you will get the maximum grant of $3,500. Okay, so the calculation was what I mentioned before, but that is not very important to know, because if you don't have the money, you don't have the 1,500, you only have 500s. When you put that in, the government will give you the maximum grant on that. So that is 3 times. That is $1,500 for the first 500 donated. Okay, so if the net family income is over the threshold I just mentioned, then you still get something. You would just get, a matching grant for the first $1,000, dollar for dollar. So, if you put in, you earn so much income, then you still put in $1,000, the government will give you a grant of $1,000. So for the bonds, I mentioned earlier, you don't need to make any contribution. So that is good to know. But one thing is, it's also kind of income sensitive and based on the family net income. So this is much lower. So be mindful of that. For the tax year 2020, the family net income less than $31,711, then you will get the full bond. So automatically, after you have filed your income tax, and you have a valid DTC and existing RDSP, then the bond will come into your RDSP on the last day of the year. And that is also, a prorated amount if it is between the net income is between $31,711 and $48,535. So if the family income is less than that, you will still get a partial bond. So they will calculate that prorated. If it is over that threshold of $48,535, then the beneficiary will receive no bond into the RDSP. So to qualify for that, it is important to file the income tax. And not only that, so if it is the first time that you open the RDSP and receive the grant, the bonds, then you need to have the past 2 years income tax in place. So it's not just the current year, but also the past year. If you don't file your income tax, the bonds will not come. Okay, so I think it's a lot of information to digest today, and we have broken the RDSP information into 3 sessions. So the next one I'll be talking about is how to maximize your RDSP, and we'll talk a little bit about different provisions that they have provided, say for some unexpected things happen, like you cannot contribute or you suddenly can contribute a lot, and how to grow your RDSP over time. So we will talk a little bit about that, more about that in the next session. So for the time now, and that is it for today. I hope you will join me again for the next session. Thank you. Bye-bye.